Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe, Kudzai, Mudzimu Mukulu. We give praises unto our great ancestors, Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters. We're going to get into, a little bit of an impromptu situation right about now. As many of you may know, the issue of reparations is hot on the agenda and is being highly well discussed in the UK media at the moment. And when I say highly well, I mean in terms of quantity of conversation and not quality of conversation. But what has facilitated and precipitated this rise in reparations conversation is the fact that the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, is currently taking place in Samoa. And many of the nations of CARICOM are set to be going there to put reparations on the agenda. That are going right about now, kings and queens. Yeah, so that's the thing there. And in response, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has, stated openly that there shall be no apology and no movement towards reparations, but it is being suggested that at least some of the CARICOM heads of state are going to go there and put it on the agenda anyway. So we're going to see what I go on, yeah? But what is always interesting to me is the conversations in the media and how they take place, yeah? The conversations in the media and how they take place. And I say that because there are various different perspectives within the reparations movement, right? In terms of whether we should even be pursuing reparations, and if so, how, and under what circumstances, under what kinds of organizational formations, and so on. And that's just talking about people who actually agree with reparations as a principle, yeah? And I'm one such person. I always approach the conversation about reparations with the understanding that reparations is a just demand, yes? This is outside of whether you think it's viable or not, whether you think the people that are supposed to secure and engage in that process are going to do so in good faith, yeah? Whether you believe that it's correct based upon our current level of organization or not to put reparations so strongly on the agenda, reparations is a just demand. And beyond the logistics of reparations, the conversation itself is important because of the context in which a conversation such as reparations places the history of African people, the history of African people in the Caribbean and in the Western world, and how the story of the world as we know it and the world as it was is going to be transmitted to our future generations. Yeah. And so that is the particular importance of the reparations conversation for me. It is a conversation that gives definitive markers in terms of how we understand the history, and how we understand the history shapes the geopolitical reality of the now. So it's much more than whether them going pay away or not. Yeah, that's even a minor conversation to me. Yeah, in terms of the specifics of reparations as it stands at the moment right now. But we'll get into that in a second. And so, because I've seen a lot of these conversations, I thought it might be important to review some of them. And I may do a couple of these. We'll see. Yeah, no promises, but I may do a couple of these. And I am going to review one such conversation that took place on the Jeremy Vine show, which is on Channel 5. Yeah, this segment took place. Now, I don't watch Jeremy Vine regular, so every now and then you see a different name on the thing. And I don't know how it works, but it seems as though different hosts have their own segments or sections, and this section is under Storm Huntley. Although Storm Huntley was not hosting the section, it was Vanessa Feltz who was hosting the section, and the guests were Lin Mei, who is a black conservative voice in the UK. Very much I think she will regard herself as Thatcherite in in her politics, and very much, yeah, a rising star within the Black conservative industrial complex. And then there's a European British, I believe he's British anyway, man on the panel whose name is Andy something or another. I can't remember his surname. Forgive me. Yeah. So I'm gonna just go into the conversation, pause it at different points, and provide some commentary as regards all the conversation I got. Yeah. So, let's get into this thing right about now.
Now, I'd love your calls on this. Love to hear from you on this one. Do you think that Britain should pay compensation for its part in the slave trade?
All right. So immediately we have to pause. Yeah. Because the conversation that has been raised by the CARICOM heads of government and reparations activists around the world is reparations, not compensation. Compensation is a part of the overall reparations agenda. It is a component of reparatory justice, but it is not reparatory justice in its completion. Yeah. And so one of the key dynamics of how reparations is discussed in mass media is to confine the conversation to compensation and treat compensation as though it is the totality of reparations. This is done for a number of reasons. One of them is that the limitation of the conversation focuses on money. Compensation is money, and that is easier to translate to audiences who are often concerned and think in monetary terms. It allows for easy distortions and statements to be made regarding the viability of the UK paying the money or the absurdity thereof, and all kinds of conversations about the extent to which the European community in Britain, in fact, and Great Britain as a nation state, in fact, earned and benefited from enslavement. But it's necessary for us to note, brothers and sisters, that when we are talking about reparations, we are not just discussing money. Okay? We are not just discussing money. Yes? Reparations has 5 major components, and they are restitution. And I'll read from my notes here. Restoring the victim to their original situation before the violation, such as returning property, reinstating employment, or restoring liberty. So they don't want to talk about restitution because then we're going to have a conversation about the extent of the stolen wealth. Yes, coming out of the enslavement and colonization process. And that is another point that we have to highlight. That when we talk about reparations, we are not just talking about the period commonly referred to as enslavement. We are talking about enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonization. Yeah, we'll get into that later. But just off the bat, if we talk about restitution, we're going to have a conversation with the British Museum and the Petrie Museum and the Buckingham Palace and any number of other institutions that are holding stolen wealth of African people. Yes? Then there's rehabilitation, long-term psychological and legal care. Yeah? That should speak for itself. So I don't want to make the video too long, so we're not going to go into that. Satisfaction. Measures such as apologies, memorials, formal acknowledgement of the unlawful nature of the breach. Yes? Then there's compensation, reimbursement for losses such as loss of profits or employment. Then there's guarantees of non-repetition, measures to prevent the violation from happening again, such as legal and institutional reform or measures to deter further harm to the victim. So that guarantees of non-repetition, in order for that to take place, you would have to look at the entire global economic system as it is currently constituted. It will bring the United Nations under fire. And the fact that there are 5 what they call permanent members of the Security Council who have a veto over any policy of the United Nations, and no African or Caribbean nations have a voice in that regard. You have to bring the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization under fire for instituting policies that govern the global economy that fundamentally and inherently disenfranchise and disempower our nations in Africa and the Caribbean. Them know I have the conversation there. So it's easier to focus the thing on compensation alone. Yes. I should also say that restitution also has to do with how history is written. The esteem that African people are held in as regards to history. That Britain and the rest of Europe committed crimes in terms of defaming the character of African people and African civilizations. And even this narrative, for example, that is common in the reparations discourse regarding the involvement of Africans on the continent, almost exclusively painted as those who sold their own people into enslavement, is an issue that will have to be addressed as a part of restitution. They don't want to have that conversation because in order to maintain the moral high ground in terms of global political engagement, they need narratives such as that to perpetuate themselves. Yeah. And so again, if we are not discussing restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition, we are not discussing reparations. And there's one more I have to add, which is if harms and crimes are still continuing, then the first demand is cessation. That means the crime have to stop. Uno have to stop do where uno do. Again, that brings the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, various corporations in Britain, BP and Shell, for example, De Beers, Lon Min, yeah, mining corporation. All of these corporations come under fire now for continued crimes that they have committed against African people until today. So we've not even got, a minute into the conversation and we see the framing already, brothers and sisters. All right, so let's go forward now and take in the rest of this conversation. Yeah.
2222. That's the number, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this. Labour MPs, at least some of them, are putting pressure on the Prime Minister to open talks about reparations to the Caribbean countries when he visits the Commonwealth Summit, which has just begun on Samoa. Former governments have always resisted these calls, and Downing Street has already ruled out a formal apology on the issue of slavery.
So just to clarify, when she says that Labour MPs are putting pressure on the government, Keir Starmer is the head of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party are currently in government at the moment. But there are some reparations activists in the UK that are a part of the Pan-African Reparations Coalition of Europe. And so brothers and sisters may know of leading lights such as Esther Stalford Hossey, Brother Coffee Clue, and a number of young brothers and sisters that they're also working with are involved in the all-party parliamentary group on reparations. Yeah. And so there are some Labour MPs who are involved with that all-party parliamentary process. And so within Parliament, they are forwarding the reparations agenda, the parliamentary element of it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Or at least helping to forward it. Would probably be a better way of putting it. So that's just to explain that dynamic.
But campaigners say we do have a moral duty to address the injustices of the past and our role in that. It's estimated that we owe trillions in compensation for our historical involvement in slavery in 14 different countries. So I wonder whether you agree with this and you think it's long overdue, we ought to be paying, or whether you think we simply cannot afford it. Let's start with Lin Mei on this. You were born in the Caribbean.
Yes, I was. I think we have to be realistic, and this is why I do get frustrated with the reparations conversation. Firstly, it was a long time ago, and I don't think we can have one figure just to, be able to pay it out. But what I would like...
All right, so let's pause there, yeah? So I have watched this, yeah, and I will say that it appears that Lin Mei has evolved on the issue, okay? Because some of what she says in this conversation, I'm sure she wasn't saying a couple years ago, yeah? And we probably, and I've not gone back to check the record on that, although I know that Lin Mei is very particular in terms of how she curates her digital presence, as well as the fact that she's very particular in terms of who she allows to comment and what comments she allows other people to see in terms of her content. Yeah, that's another story for another time. However, she goes on to say some things that I don't necessarily disagree with, right? But it's clear to me that Lin Mei is not informed on the subject of reparations. Yeah. And she begins this conversation talking about it was a few, however, it was a long time ago, and we can't just give out a sum. Yeah. It is important to study this issue in the context of the movement that has been bringing the issue, putting the issue of reparations on the agenda, and the history of that movement. Because if you did, you would not make a statement like the one that she's just made. Yeah, because nobody is doing this as in terms of slapping a fee on it, yeah, and saying pay out that that lump sum of money, other than people in the British media, particularly, who are trying to distort the issue and obfuscate the conversation. Okay, so point number one, that is not being done by anybody who is in any way a significant, long-standing reparations activist who has been involved in the movement for any length of time. Anybody informed on the issue is not doing that. Yeah? Okay. The second thing is the statement that it's a long time ago. We are discussing enslavement, colonialism, and neocolonialism. Yeah? Nobody can suggest that colonialism was a long time ago. Even if you make the argument for enslavement, and neocolonialism is a current condition. But even as regards enslavement, when you consider the fact that we are talking about institutions that were involved in this crime against African humanity, and that to a significant degree, particularly corporations within British law, have the status of individual people. So the length of time that has passed to a significant degree is irrelevant when the institutions who are responsible still exist. Basic example of this. If you are the head of a corporation, and when you inherit the position as CEO or whatever form of owner, the debts of that corporation become your debts. Doesn't matter that you were not with the company or the head of the company when the debts were incurred. It doesn't matter, say for example, that the person who under whose premiership the debts were incurred is no longer with the company or no longer alive. The institution itself is liable, yes, for the assets and the liabilities of that corporation. Asolitingo. Yeah. So the question is, do the institutions who wax themselves rich off of the enslavement of African people still exist? That is the question. And when you look at it in those terms, it matters not how long ago the crime was. In fact, the fact that it was so long ago exacerbates the criminality. In other words, you were so criminal for this length of time, and for the time that is elapsed from that time till now, you have refused to engage in acts of justice in relation to those that you have harmed. And I hope that's clear. Yeah. And there are many things, some things she says I agree with later on, but there are many things that makes it clear to me. And I did release a commentary in this regard, particularly in relation to comments that Lin Mei had made some time ago, about a week ago, that people need to inform themselves. It's very, very clear to me that Lin Mei is not particularly informed on this issue, although she has a whole heap to say about it, yeah, which is deep, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, that's how the thing go.
To see is tax breaks. Caribbean people, especially in firstly, it was a long time ago, and I don't think we can have one figure just to, you know, be able to pay it out. But what I would like to see is tax breaks. Caribbean people, especially in the United Kingdom, we don't even make up 3%. If we had, for example, 10 years of tax breaks, income tax, stamp duty, those sorts of things, I think that would be more of a doable thing. It would not affect the economy. Now, the reason for reparations is
A few things there, sir. First and foremost, the tax breaks argument, or the non-paying of tax, is a part of the research and proposals of different reparations movements. Yeah, and when I say that, I'm talking about the entire reparations complex, understanding that reparations, as far as African people is concerned, is a conversation that is taking place on at least 3 different continents. Yeah. Well, let's say 6. Let's say 5, 6. Yeah. So when I say that, what I mean is Europe, including Britain in Europe, Africa, and then the Americas. All right. You know what I'm saying? So North and South and Central America, the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So within all of those, and a lot of the times, our people are working together. Yes, the reparations movement, this is why it's important to know the history, has consistently been in conversation with each other, even as it forwards various agendas, you know, in its specific locality. There's been a lot of collaboration, particularly since the 1990s on the issue, the early 1990s on the issue of reparations between Africans on the continent, in the Americas, and in Europe. Yeah. So that tax suggestion, you know, has been a part of. Yeah. The problem, however, is when you throw it out as this is my opinion, it divorces, it lacks context, and it divorces it from the entirety of the demands and the agenda, in terms of placing it and making it make sense within a broader context. This is why it's important to inform yourself, because anybody can go on a platform and say, in my opinion, it should look like this. Okay, what's the justification behind your opinion? Yeah. What would be the justification behind? What's the justification behind the figure of a 10-year span? What thought has gone into that? Right. If you're in conversation with people who have been about that reparations life, maybe you could put some substance behind your suggestion. Yeah, that's one thing. Okay, that's one thing, because there are various suggestions similar to that. You know, like for example, in America, there's a suggestion of free education. Yeah, you know, university education for descendants of enslaved Africans, and so on and so forth. Yeah, various. You haven't informed yourself, so you're not aware of these things. The second thing I want to highlight here is this issue of Caribbean. Yeah. And I'm noticing this dynamic where people are trying to reduce the reparations conversation as far as Britain is concerned to an issue of Caribbeans. The reparations movement that has been in play for decades at this point does not do that. And the reason why a lot of people do this is because many of us have become invested in this idea that Africans on the continent, the roles that they played in the enslavement process was the sellers of us who ended up in the Caribbean. That the entirety of the African continent, or at least the entirety of the populations of places whereby the so-called transatlantic slave trade was prolific, are the descendants of a group of people who ganged up on another group of people to sell those people into slavery, and all of the descendants of those people who were sold ended up in the Americas, while all of the descendants of the sellers remained on the African continent. This is a lie. A lie that is designed to extricate the African continent from consideration in the reparations discussion, and to demonize and to create division between Africans on the continent and Africans coming from the Caribbean, so as to weaken the reparations movement and the reparations demand. Let us be clear, brothers and sisters, that Africans on the continent are the descendants of enslaved people, just like we in the Caribbean. You don't take people mama, people papa, people brother, people sister, people auntie, people uncle, and not have families destroyed on the African continent. You don't demand and institute and kidnap that number of people without destroying social institutions, political institutions, economic institutions on the African continent. It doesn't happen otherwise. And to what extent Africans on the continent, and let's make it clear that Africans were not only complicit or colluding with the enslaver on the continent, there was complicity and collusion at every point throughout the enslavement process. But the idea that complicity somehow negates or mitigates the crime of the enslaver, and I'm not saying that Lin Mei is saying this necessarily, she'd have to make that comment herself, but this is an argument that is made, or it's made for the purpose of providing mitigation and negation, is a nonsense. And this is only done when we're talking about African enslavement. The complicity of some African people with enslavers, European enslavers, speaks to the level of criminality of the enslaver, not the joint shared complicity of African people as a group, Africans on the continent as a group. There has never been any such form of oppression whereby there are members of the oppressed group who don't find themselves colluding and complicit with the oppressor. That is a part of the process and speaks to the level and the nature of the crime and the criminality of the enslaver. Yes? So let's make that very, very clear. But this focus on Caribbean people, we have to watch that, brothers and sisters, in terms of what the British media, British political class, its commentators, and those of us in our community who are complicit and in league with them are attempting to do with that designation. And one more thing I have to step on this thing. Yeah, I've noticed this sensibility to speak about reparations specifically on people that are very loyal to Western states, yeah, people that are loyal to the British state or people that are loyal to the American state, to discuss reparations in ways that are designed to reinforce the national character and even the economy of the nation that the reparatory justice is being demanded from. Yeah, that we want Britain to understand that reparations is going to benefit you. This is the idea that we're going to appease them by saying it won't affect the economy too much. Black people are only 3% of the population or less than 3% of the population. I saw another example of this with Tariq Nasheed recently, yeah? Founder and leader of the foundational Black American movement, the FBA movement, so to speak, in the United States of America. And it was an interview, and I forget who was interviewing him, but he made the point that one of the reasons why it's important for Black Americans, foundational Black Americans, to delineate and distinguish themselves from Africans from the continent and Africans from the Caribbean in relation to the issue of reparations is the fact that the American establishment can be assured of the fact that the money would stay in America as opposed to being sent off to the Caribbean or Africa or outside of the country. That they can be assured that the foundational Black Americans are going to make sure that America benefits from the reparations. And this is a similar argument to me, yeah, that, rest assured, yeah, that we in the West, we don't want, we in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, we don't want, have too much of a negative impact on the economy around here. See? Yeah, we don't want to do that, We lie into the thing. Yeah. So there's no say, listen, all right, when we ask around here, yeah, don't worry about it. We have your best interest at heart too. We just want to look at this and look at that and all them things there. Yeah, it's a problematic argument, Rasta. Yeah, it's a problematic argument because it does not speak to the systematic realities that are constructed to continue the mass flow of wealth and resources from African and Caribbean nations to the West. We cannot sustain that. We cannot sustain the relationships that we currently have with Britain and institutions that Britain has a significant hand in governing, such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, etc., etc., etc. We cannot maintain those relationships and say we are engaging in reparatory justice. This is a flawed argument. And that is the danger of trying to engage a conversation of reparations whilst you are so fundamentally embedded and loyal to the British state. Make we continue.
Because people from the Caribbean were never paid reparations. They weren't paid anything. And after, for example, like in Barbados, where they generated a lot of sugar, the Brits moved out and left them in destitution. If you look at the Caribbean now, there's still many people from Britain, for example, Drax Hall, who is a Conservative MP, who owns lots of land because his forefathers were slave owners. He doesn't necessarily need that land. The people of Barbados need that land. He could easily give that land back. Now, my thing is, if we look at the reparations,
now, she made a good point there. And when you look at the extent to which people say, it was a long time ago, what's a good relevance to do? You can literally trace wealth that people own in Britain today. Yeah. And that is one of the most stark examples. Yeah. Whereby their family's wealth comes from or involves enslavement labor. Yeah. And the ownership of wealth and resources that were that Africans in those regions were dispossessed of. Yeah, it's a good point. And again, I feel like she's evolved on the issue because she certainly weren't making points like that a couple years ago. And so, what's happening here in my humble estimation, is that because of some of the statements that she's made and the backlash that she's got, she's adopted some of the points, of people that have disagreed with her, but will never really give credence to where a lot of those arguments come from, which is the reparations movement in particular and the Pan-African movement in general, because it has been the Pan-African movement that has been developing the reparations principles and argument and agenda for decades at this point. Yeah, so you can say all this stuff, but without giving credence. Yeah, so it's just my opinion, right? You know what I'm saying? This is my opinion, which is a problem to me. Yeah, which is a problem to me. But let's go. But she made a good point. Let's go forward.
Given to the Jewish community, absolutely the Jewish community should have received those reparations, and they did, in essence of 82 million from Germany. And people say, that was then, there's still people alive from the Holocaust, but Germany has pledged to continue to pay, even when those people who were in the camps, they passed away, they continue to pay because they see the need for it. But also on the other side, many people are sick to death with this whole woke conversation, using the race card, the victimhood mentality. If you want that to kind of end, then you need to compensate people because they haven't been compensated.
And when you
So we get problematic again. Yeah, we get problematic again. Not a bad point in relation to Jewish reparations. The people that are still alive are few and far between. And there's no sign of the fact that when the last person dead, that all of the reparations that Germany has been giving to the state of Israel and various Jewish individuals and institutions is going to end. Bearing in mind that the Holocaust as a historical event is in around 80 years ago, and African nations were still colonized into the 80s and 90s. Yeah, into the 80s and 90s, brothers and sisters. Yeah. Atrocities were committed, for example, by the British against the people of Kenya, particularly the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, and the uprisings that took place there. Okay, that was after the Holocaust. Yeah, and we also know that many of the worst crimes, record of many of the worst crimes of Britain, were actually destroyed. There was an operation called Operation Legacy or something of that nature, whereby the colonial authorities on the continent were required to destroy some of the evidence of their criminality so that it doesn't get passed down in the generations. Yeah, so we know all of these things took place. But this idea that reparations now should in fact, ease is a way to ease the tension, yeah, in relation to the so-called woke agenda. And I find them arguments, they're problematic. Yeah, I actually don't care, what European people have to say about wokeness and so on and so. And reparation is not designed, what I'm saying, to appease us to a degree whereby we can stop talking about woke matters, and annoying white people. That should not be a part of the conversation, as far as me concerned. All right, so let's go forward with some more of this thing.
you say tax breaks, do you mean tax breaks for people of Caribbean descent in this country, or you mean in Caribbean countries?
What I would like to see in the Caribbean is promises over a couple of decades of schools, hospitals. In Barbados, many British people come and enjoy there. There's still only one hospital. Can you imagine, for thousands and thousands of people, one hospital? So if they really did have any form of meaningful discussion, build 3 more hospitals, build some schools, infrastructure, not necessarily millions of pounds. England doesn't see that much growth. So I'd like to see more infrastructure, a promise of that in the Caribbean. But for those in Western societies, like in Britain, let us have tax breaks that will allow us to feel some sense of, compensation about what has happened. And it's never been done. We would never, ever question the Jewish community receiving reparations, yet none have been given to people of slavery descent.
All right, what do you think about this, Andy?
So before we get to Andy, again, what she wants to see in the Caribbean. So the problem here again is that this is all Lin Mei's opinion, and reparations. It's like if you want an opinion on law, any form of law, right? You know what I'm saying? You got to speak to a lawyer. And that don't mean that you can't have an opinion on what the lawyer says. But if you want your opinion to be informed, you got to speak to a lawyer. If you want to know the history of China, you speak to a historian on the history of China. Somebody will study the thing. And that don't mean that you can't have an opinion on what the historian say. You know what I mean? But if you want your opinion to be informed, you speak to the expert in the thing. So why is it that, brothers and sisters, that people feel that they can just come and, on national television and that their opinion suffices in a conversation such as this? Not to say that their opinion is irrelevant. When I say that, may I say that it, especially for us as black people, let's be informed on the thing. Now, for example, what I want to see in the Caribbean, for example, is hospital and rated here. Now, there's a CARICOM 10-point plan of action. This whole conversation has been raised because the Caribbean community has an issue that it is taking to the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit. Why not at least inform yourself on what the CARICOM 10-point plan is? Now, disclaimer, plenty problems I have with CARICOM and the CARICOM reparations agenda, and how it is constituted and how it's formulated. Much of my issues pertain to the neo-colonial nature of a lot of our governments in the Caribbean and the extent to which those governments have the moral authority as well as the institutional fortitude to forward and facilitate a reparations agenda. That is another subject for another time. The point I'm making here, however, is whether you agree or disagree or have areas of departure, inform yourself on the thing. For example, the 10 points, and we're not going to go into detail here, but the 10 points, in fact, let me bring that one up on the screen for Ono. So Ono can see it. All right. The CARICOM 10 points. This is so easy to get. Just CARICOM reparations, and you'll find when I look upon right here now, there. Right. So, full and formal apology, point number 1. Indigenous Peoples Development Programs, point number 2. So that relates to kind of what she was just saying a minute ago. Okay. Development. Funding for repatriation to Africa. For those who want to go back to Africa, then want funding for that. The establishment of cultural institution and the return of cultural heritage. Assistance in remedying the public healthcare crisis. That relates directly to what Lin Mei has said. But because Lin Mei is uninformed on the subject, she's just on this. This is my opinion. She hasn't connected her opinion to what the people who have facilitated, whose actions have inspired this conversation are actually asking for. It's problematic. 6, education programs. 7, the enhancement of historical and cultural knowledge exchanges. 8, psychological rehabilitation as a result of the transmission of trauma. 9, the right to development through the use of technology. 10, debt cancellation and monetary compensation. So you notice we got to compensation in point number 10. All of this is dealing with different, all the other 9 points are dealing with different dimensions of the thing. And even when we talk about money, we're not talking about compensation, we're also talking about the current issue of debt and debt cancellation. Okay. So again, informing yourself on the issue informs the conversation that you're having online. And because people don't want to, take the time to inform themselves, because that informing of themselves is going to connect them to movements and to organizations that the white conservative class in this country frowns upon and wants to keep marginalized. And so, as a dutiful member of the conservative, an aspiring black conservative, you have to do the work of continuing to marginalize yeah, those organizations and institutions, and ensuring that said voices are not heard in the conversation, even though every now and then you're going to teeth a talking point here and there from them and act like it's just your opinion. Yeah, no, Rasta. It can't work. All right, if you want your opinion to be even more informed, you ain't got to be a black nationalist, Pan-Africanist like me. But respect the fact that the reparations conversation has been forwarded and developed by I and I. Let's respect that fact. I agree with everything what I and I say, Yeah. But yo, don't just teeth up the talking point there, man. One that say, are you one? Create the thing. Yeah, it is dishonest. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, let's get back into this thing, yeah.
I'm sympathetic to the sense that, the country could pay some sort of reparations or repair damage done in specific countries where they're still living with the legacy of the slave trade.
Which they are, yeah.
I think for people living in this country, what worries me, and certainly when I've talked to my friends and colleagues who might be in line for reparations, is that there are so many cultural tensions here. What would it do in a society where you were saying we're going to treat people differently in the tax system, for instance, as you suggest, based on their skin color? What worries me is that we would base...
Simple point. Yeah, simple point. It wouldn't be based upon skin color. It would be based upon the fact that particular people who happen to have a particular skin color were subject to a harm. Yeah? So it's really about the descendants of the people who the harm was committed against and the people who the harms are currently being committed against. That's what it's about. If you don't want it to be based upon skin color, the people that you have to blame for that are your white ancestors and contemporary institutions who developed, maintain, and sustain political economic policies and disparities based upon the color of people's skin. Yeah, it's such an absurd point that you can do harm and commit crimes against people on the basis of their skin color. Yes? But when they seek justice for said harms, their skin color should not be a part of the consideration. Absurdity, madness of these people. It's serious business.
Particularly witness a Chernobyl-sized explosion of kind of invisible, silent racism in the houses and streets of this country that would lead to a racial,
can I
cultural
just come back to
civil
what
war.
you said, though, about tax?
So now, yeah, another absurd point, right? So basically, look, if justice for African people brings out white racism, that is a part of the reason for the reparations agenda in the first place. Yes? If doing justice for African people is what is going to inspire, yeah, Chernobyl and whatever, size of blah, 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 blah. That's not because of reparations. That's because people are racist. And for as long as their racism is not challenged in any way institutionally, they're all right. But if at the moment that the idea or the act of justice becomes apparent, their vexation comes to the fore, it's not really a reason not to do justice. Let's be real out here.
breaks treating people differently on the basis of the colour of their skin. Up until the 70s, black people were treated massively differently anyway, and it was accepted in this country. Even I hear many people from working class English backgrounds who say, you know, well, it wasn't my fault, I wasn't a slave owner, my forefathers were, and I understand that, but the environment, even when Caribbean people came over here, they were prevented from getting
Caribbean people, yeah, because Africans from the continent didn't experience that for some reason. Like with this consistent attempt to do this black Caribbeans versus black Africans thing, we have to watch it, brothers and sisters. We have to watch it and the agenda behind it. Yeah, we have to watch it and the agenda behind it, because when if we're gonna use the prevention of jobs and so on and so forth, oftentimes that will affect Africans from the continent more than it will affect Africans from the Caribbean. Why? Because of the fact that many of us from the Caribbean have European names. Yes? As a result of enslavement. So when the names come, the idea, because for those who are not aware, is that there's research being done that when applying for a job, you're less likely to get the job if your name looks like it comes from a quote-unquote ethnic minority. There are very few names that are common to Africans from the Caribbean that will be recognizable on site by white employers. There are very many names coming from Africans from the continent, that would be easily recognizable. If you're going to use that example, you can't confine the dynamic to Africans from the Caribbean people.
That slavery just stopped 500 years ago. We were still seeing the effect. Even up to now, if you look at the institutions, when David Cameron, a conservative leader, said that when you have a different sort of name, there is clear disparity in people who are treated.
I understand that.
The effects are still now. The impact is still now.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm saying is that the best way to tackle ongoing racism in this country is probably not to say you're going to get money and you're not because of the colour of your skin.
We'll leave there. We're going to come straight back to this after the break. But now we're returning to our conversation about whether Britain should pay compensation for its historic involvement in the slave trade. And I'd love to take your calls on this. 0207 862 2222. That's the number. Do please give us a ring. And let's start with Alice, who's in Manchester. Hi, Alice. Obviously, this is emotional and also incredibly expensive. But is it the right thing to do?
No, it is not. And good morning, Vanessa.
Morning.
This is just, it makes my blood boil. First of all, can I just say that I am of Indian birth. I was actually born, funny enough, in Africa, of Indian parents, and I moved to this country when I was 16. I think I'm a couple of years older than you are.
Right.
And it just makes my blood boil, all this nonsense about reparation.
Why?
How far back do you go? I mean, if there's one country that's been exploited, it's been India. It's been pillaged, plundered, raped, all our beautiful semi-precious stones taken. You have a woman called Narinda who keeps going on about, the Kohinoor diamond and all this nonsense. The fact of the matter is nobody knows, number one, where the Kohinoor diamond was mined in the first place. It could be in India, it could have been in Afghanistan. Nobody knows. And in any case, apparently it was a 10-year-old prince that...
So just to say, I don't know anybody who's a reparations activist as it relates to African people who would deny on principle that the people of India deserve reparations for all kinds of different crimes that were committed against them. Yeah. So I'm not sure where this woman, finds the God, yeah, to come on, and based upon what relevance does this have to do with the subject? If you don't believe that your own people, should pursue reparative justice, that's on you. That's for you and your people to decide. Yeah. It is a fact, however, that Britain thieved enough things from India. Right? That's just a fact. And so to whatever extent a reparative justice demand exists, it is a just demand. That is the point.
that was forced to give it to the British.
All right, but let's focus on reparations for slavery, because otherwise we'll get completely diverted into the Colonel Diamond, which is fascinating, but not necessarily for this programme. Why do you feel that the very suggestion makes your blood boil? Why does it make you so very angry?
Because because slavery now it's not quite the same as it was 200 years ago. That's over and done with. Yeah, I mean, yes, you have modern day slavery, which is not quite the same as it was. You know, and we've moved on.
By the way, the Britain, the period in which Britain actually abolished slavery, not the slave trade, but the actual slavery officially, because all kinds of things was going on after this, is 1838. Yeah, so we haven't actually arrived at the 200-year mark yet. Okay, let's bear that in mind. We haven't actually arrived at the 200-year mark yet. And then we have to account for the fact that Britain, after, and this is why it's important not to exclude the African continent, after enslavement, colonized the nations in which it was holding enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and throughout the Americas, and went into overdrive in terms of invasions and conquests of the African continent for the purpose of subjecting our people on the continent to colonization. Have to be clear about these things. Yeah. Invasions and conquests which killed Africans on the continent for the purpose of taking over nations and land, destroying institutions and instituting systems of colonization that were designed to extract millions worth of resources over time. That's what took place. That wasn't 200 years ago. That was going on up until the 1980s and 90s. And it's still going on if we consider neocolonialism.
Alice, can I just ask Alice? Up until 2015, we were paying via our taxes to compensate the slave owners, not the slaves who were left destitute with nothing. Up until 2015, their estates were assisted financially in my lifetime, in your lifetime. Now, would you say that we shouldn't have done that?
Well, no, I don't think we should have done that, quite frankly.
So yeah, good rebuttal. You know, Lin Mei, you know what I'm saying, has learned well from the organizations and institutions and reparations activists who she won't talk to and refuse to give credit. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, it was a well-used, you know, employment of that particular argument. And it is a fact. Yeah, look up that, brothers and sisters, that all of us in the UK were in fact paying through our taxes the government for money that it loaned to enslavers. After enslavement was abolished, you know, the government took 20 million to pay back enslavers for loss of property. Yeah. And all of us were paying back that money up until the year 2015. Okay, so that comes back to this point about institutions, and because them never said that at no point did the British government and the Treasury and the Bank of England and so on and so forth say, well, actually, it's such a long time ago, you know, it was such a long time. Let's cancel this debt. No, everybody had to pay back until 2015 when the debt done. A blow is not.
Okay, and what about, like I said, Germany compensated the Jewish community 82 billion and have pledged to continue to do it for decades more. Do you think that they should stop that for the Jewish community?
Absolutely not, because first of all, they stole a lot of the Jewish people's possessions. apart from the torture and the horrendous evil that they perpetrated on them. So that is totally different.
Because they're possessed.
All right. Oh, wait. In fact, let me play this next part.
Possessions were stolen, but even though they took human cargo, they treated them like possessions. Nothing has ever been done to compensate them, where my surname is a slave owner's surname. I can go to the plantation in Barbados and see that my family were owned. You don't think we should be compensated, but because Germany stole Jewish items of theirs, they should be compensated.
The problem with this program is that
all right, so this is why it's important to be informed, yeah? What Lin Mei said is not wrong, right? First and foremost, the idea that the Jewish people deserve reparations because they stole Jewish property, as well as, the other, atrocities that they committed against them. But that fact makes it totally different. Is absurd, yeah? And so Lin Mei was correct to say, well, but they stole human beings. Yeah, they stole actual human beings. Okay. However, not being informed on the subject leads to certain mistakes being made. Because if you understood restitution as reparations, it would be, and if it wasn't for the fact that we are now trying to negate Africans on the continent as far as reparations is concerned, it would be understood that immense amounts of wealth were stolen from Africa during the enslavement process and after the enslavement process as it regards colonialism. You would also be aware of the fact that many of the people that were kidnapped and stolen and trafficked were stolen, kidnapped, and trafficked because of their skilled labor. Yeah? You will be able to identify the fact that there are practices in agriculture and blacksmithing, for example, that enslavers were able to enrich themselves on based upon the enslavement of skilled Africans in these areas. You would also be able to identify that the entire, for example, museum industry in this country is built upon enslavement and colonialism and stolen wealth and property from African nations and Caribbean nations and so on and so forth. You will be able to identify all of these things. Yeah. Again, why it's important to be informed on the issue. What she said in response is not wrong. But because Lin Mei is ill-informed on reparations and has allowed a conversation to take place and engages with reparations as though it is compensation, she is not equipped to engage restitution, guarantees of non-repetition, satisfaction, yes, cessation, etc., etc. It's important to be informed.
You don't really give the chance to the viewers to actually answer back.
No, we certainly do, actually. Of course we do, Alice. What would you like to say that you don't feel you've had a chance to say?
What I'd like to say is this. Britain seems to be carrying all the blame for slavery. You seem to forget that lots of people in Africa, the Africans themselves, were involved in the slave trade, and they were selling to the Middle Eastern people, and they were the ones who were rounding up their own people.
All right. I hope you feel you've had a chance to make your point, Alice. It's been great to have you on the show.
Anybody who's been seeing and observing and hearing these conversations for a long time would have guessed exactly where she was going to go. Yeah. Went back into a corner. Africans sold Africans into slavery. You know what I'm saying? She didn't even address even the point. Yeah. that Lin Mei made. You know what I'm saying? Let's just totally divert the conversation. Nobody brings this argument, right, in relation to the Jewish community. Yeah, it is a fact that there were Jews who were complicit with the Nazis during the Holocaust. Nobody brings an argument that suggests that because of that fact, the harm that was committed against them was their own fault, or that they don't deserve reparations because of the complicity of some members of their group. It's a ridiculous argument to make. But only in the instance of African enslavement is that argument routinely made. Yeah, it's such a, I don't know. But when we see it made, brothers and sisters, we should understand that the argument is made because to dehumanize, yes, African people. Yeah. The argument is made because African people are not considered human beings. And so you can level these arguments because you're not talking about human beings, brothers and sisters. We should be aware of that fact. I'm going to wrap up soon.
So let's go to Grace in London. Hello, Grace.
Hi, good to talk to you again. Yeah, unfortunately, we can't repair history. It's really important to talk about history.
Now, this was an interesting call, yeah? And I'm going to probably wrap it up after we get the response to this call. But listen to this woman's call. It's a very interesting one.
And to learn about the horrific things that happened. But we can't repair it. The suffering that the enslaved people went through is beyond imagination, and it can't be changed. And giving money to their descendants now wouldn't change it. However, we do need to acknowledge what the situation today is, which is that there are some parts of our world where there is very severe poverty, lots of it related to the history of colonialism, and there's an ongoing extraction of wealth. There is far more wealth coming to the developed world from the developing world than we give in aid. So we're actually still, via banks and corporations, exploiting other parts of the world, in addition to the existence of modern slavery.
So let me ask you, Grace, you feel that it wouldn't make sense to pay money to any of the descendants of people who were enslaved, but you do think...
Right. So
it would make sense to do, for example, as Lin Mei suggested, and pay for hospitals, schools, and much needed infrastructure in different Caribbean countries. That would make sense to you, would it? Do you think we should do that?
I think, yes. I think it wouldn't make sense to give people money on the basis of their ancestors, because they haven't been through what their ancestors have been through, and we aren't responsible for what our ancestors did. But because we, living in Britain, are beneficiaries of the unjust transfer of wealth, and because the exploitation is still continuing in different forms, we do need to look at current injustices, and we need to talk more about the world's very poorest and most exploited people, including those who are getting minerals out of the ground for our smartphones, including people in sweatshops, including people on cocoa plantations. We need to talk far more about these people who are suffering right now.
But we're still seeing the impact, Grace. Grace, we're still seeing the impact of descendants are still experiencing heavy amounts of racism and still do up to this day. You know, look at the civil rights movement, look at the 60s. My father, when he came here, he couldn't have gone into many shops and hotels, and that was, you know, during his lifetime. That's my father. And you said we can't wrong history. But again, I'll ask, would you tell Germany to stop paying in the future once all of the descendants from the Holocaust have died? They have pledged for decades to come to still pay one-off payments to the Jewish community. Do you see why they're doing that?
I don't know enough about the detail of Germany's agreement to do that.
Let's move on. Grace, thank you so much. It's really lovely to hear from you, and thank you for the call. Let's talk to Michelle in Glasgow about this.
All right, so I'm probably going to make that the last section, brothers and sisters, yeah. But it's interesting that what the caller said, yeah, and you know she's negating the historical element, but she raised a lot of issues, okay, that Lin Mei did not raise. And if you are a part of, again, and informed about the reparations conversation, all of the issues that the woman just raised, I'm assuming it's a white woman, just raised, are a part of the reparations argument, a part of the reparations agenda, and a part of the reparations demand. But if you are not informed, you're going to miss that. So you can agree or disagree with what the woman said. And we obviously would disagree about the idea that you can't correct the harms of the past. I've already spoken about that earlier in this conversation that we're having now. Yeah. But it seems to me that the sister Lin Mei was not able to tap into what the woman said about the fact that the flows of wealth continue to flow from the quote-unquote developing world to the developed world as a result of the legacy of enslavement and colonialism. And that the people that live in the quote-unquote developed world today continue to benefit from unjust extractions of wealth. And if you understand the reparations conversation, you would see and know that that is a part of the thing. Now, I don't know if it's because Lin Mei's conservative sensibilities will not allow her to entertain that conversation in terms of the current nature of realities of neocolonialism as it currently exists, because that will unravel a lot of the conservative argumentation. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's what was, what I'm saying, but what I'm going to say for now, all right, is that being informed of the reparations conversation, for example, and if you read even CARICOM's platform, you will see that a lot of what they're trying to address is in relation to continued harms that are a product of the global geopolitical and economic system as it currently exists. It is important to be informed on the subject, and or people that have podcasts and engage in these conversations all the while, speak to people who are informed on the issue of reparations and reparatory justice. We're going to leave it there, brothers and sisters. We're going to leave it there. Feel free to, share your thoughts, comments, and so on in the chat. And I'll see you again as and when we engage another media analysis on this reparations conversation. There's a lot of interesting, conversations taking place at the moment, brothers and sisters. Peace and blessings. Tenda Mwadi. Give thanks unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kuzai Muzimukuru. We give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi. Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people.